A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime News, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Our case this week: is it manslaughter? If you are in a heated argument with your ex and it gets physical and then the ex-husband has a cardiac event and collapses, did the ex-wife kill him or did the underlying heart condition kill him? Well, this was a question not for a jury, but for a judge to decide in a bench trial. The argument between a socialite ex-wife and her politically prominent ex-husband took place in front of their adult daughter, who called 911 and ultimately testified against the mother. The daughter testified that mother was the aggressor. The prosecution presented their case, and when it was the defense's turn, rather than calling a single witness, the defense rested and let the judge decide. The judge ruled the ex-wife is not guilty. We're recording this on Friday, February 14th of 2025, Valentine's Day. Our guest today is Bolaños, a former homicide investigator with 30 years of law enforcement experience and the founder of Get Bit Investigations, and a dear friend of the show, a friend of mine, and a person who does a lot of volunteerism for survivors of crime. So it's always such a pleasure to have you, Louis. Hi.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate that. I never take that for granted. And a very, very happy Valentine's Day to you, my friend.
And to you, my friend. And to you. Yes, yes. It's actually quite perfect that we have a case where two people are in love, they get married, they have children, everything is great until it's not. And then one is charged, in the death of the other. Right?
Yeah, amazing. Until it's not. Right.
Until it's not. So I am honestly obsessed with this case because it's so different, because the man collapses and dies during this heated argument. And it takes a long time for investigators and the DA to even decide whether they're going to charge the other person who was in the argument with his death. It's so controversial.
Yeah, it really is. And look, it's not the first time someone's been charged with causing a heart attack and actually convicted of murder, but it's so much more egregious, the requirements for that. And this case has a lot of twists and turns in it. I'm really split on it, but I think they reached the final decision.
So this case is out of Brookline, Massachusetts, and this is where a woman has been acquitted, found not guilty in her ex-husband's death. This is after a fatal confrontation over divorce assets. The two have been described as a power couple. She a socialite, he a political consultant. Another reason I find this interesting, this is a family of privilege, a family of political connections. And, you would think if anybody can get this brushed aside, swept under the rug, it would have been these two. So
yeah. And look, that's a great point, but that also goes the other way. Did that also, or was it one of the catalysts for pushing it forward? It could have gone either way.
Right.
Yeah.
So here are the people involved. Penelope McGee, who's 58 years old, goes by Penny. She was acquitted in the 2020 death of her ex-husband, Andrew Savitz, who was 66 at the time. So rather than going for a jury trial, this was a bench trial where the decision would be made by the judge. Not just any judge. This is Massachusetts. What's the last crazy big case out of Massachusetts and out of this judge's courtroom? Karen Reed, the woman who was accused of backing into rolling over her boyfriend, the cop. It's a huge case, all sorts of shenanigans in the case. Anyway, prosecutors there are trying to figure out if they're going to retry her or not. So, but we're not going down the Karen Reed rabbit hole. But the reason I want to say something, it's the same judge. So these are two cases involving couples, bizarre deaths, involving the other. So anyway, the judge here is Beverly Canoe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She presided over the contentious Karen Reed case. Okay, so here's the background on this case. These two are affluent. They get married. Andrew was wealthy, well-known environmental consultant, had worked for previous governors and presidential runs in the Massachusetts area. Penelope, the daughter of a prominent Rhode Island family. She was reportedly vice president of J.P. Morgan, where she launched Women in Philanthropy. Very Boston, right? Since it's all very, very Northeast, very privileged, very, Okay, married 15 years. Have 3 children. But the divorce is a nasty one. And it is during a fight over the divorce that Andrew collapses and dies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into the argument. It was about 2019 and things are really going downhill for this couple. And Andrew had threatened to kick Penelope out of one of their many homes that I guess is in a family trust, and it's all very complicated. It's all very rich people problems. But the bottom line was it was time for Penelope to leave, and her former brother-in-law sends her an email saying, "You're evicted. You got to go. You got to find somewhere else to live." So January 28th of 2020, Penelope grabs her purse, goes over to Andrew's, her ex-husband's. She's fired up about the eviction email. And that's when this whole thing combusts.
Yeah. Let's go into the weeds here a little bit, Anna, because what I really want to know is, and I think this is a reasonable conclusion, but her husband, Andrew, and his brother were probably discussing quite a bit about the best way to notify Penelope that she was going to be evicted for a period of time. That in itself probably caused him some stress or, I don't know, enjoyment. Who knows what was going through his mind, right? But he was going to shut that off, discuss that. And then they decide how they're going to deliver the message, and they decide they're going to email it to her through the brother to act as a liaison, maybe to diffuse things, right? To minimize whatever reaction. But I don't know what time they sent the email, but when you described her going over to the house, it was relatively soon after getting that email. She got to the house at 10 p.m. at night to make that decision to go over there. And for Andrew, the husband, to think, I'm even going to open the door and let her in. So already up to that point, and there's a lot of stress building on both sides. Yeah. Already that's starting. So I think there's a lot of other outside influences here we're going to talk about, many, but just the 30 minutes prior to her getting to that house, they both were escalated, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is contentious. We've seen this before, couples arguing and things getting very volatile many times over divorces and splitting of assets. So according to Penelope, she claims that Andrew was screaming at her. She claimed that Andrew grabbed and pushed her. Their adult daughter, Susie, who is an 18-year-old high school senior at the time, so an adult, but she's a high school senior, right, is in the house along with her younger brother. So she, the Susie, told the younger brother, "Stay in your room." You already know that when an older sibling tells the younger one to stay in the room, they know what's going on. And they don't want that younger person to be affected by what appears to be going down. So Susie says that Penny, her mom, this is her mother, is agitated, says that mother slapped father in the face and in the chest, and that he dropped to the ground and passed out. And the daughter testified. Oh my gosh, I saw this on court TV, the testimony. Oh my goodness, the daughter testifying against the mother. And the mother.
Did she look credible to you, Anna?
The daughter?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The stress, your father is dead, your mother is charged with being responsible for his death. And you are testifying against your mother who is glaring at you? Did you see all those shots of the mother with that New England stare?
Yeah. Yeah. And it took a lot of courage for the daughter to get up there and do what she did, which basically was tell the truth. But she shed light on a different story that was given initially by Penelope.
Yes, she did. Because the daughter said, she begged her mother to give her father CPR. She testified that the mother said he doesn't need it. And then supposedly, while the daughter was on the phone with 911, the mother finally gave CPR. Mother's version is different.
Yeah. And he doesn't need it. Those words, does that mean that she was enjoying watching what was happening? Or she really thought, in her opinion, no, he's fine. Who knows? But
I don't know.
Neither of those two things by themselves constitute charges for homicide.
Right. People panic. There's a lot going on here. I don't know. She could have been in shock. I'm not defending anyone. I'm just thinking, out of everyone here, the one absolutely, I do believe, reliable story, because it is backed up by the 911 recording conversation, is that when the daughter saw that the two started fighting, this is before the father collapsed, she went upstairs to get her phone. That's when she says to the brother, "Don't come out." Gets the phone, calls 911, says they're arguing. So police immediately believe they're responding to a domestic dispute. And then while she's on the phone with 911, the father collapses. So now it becomes a medical emergency.
Right. 911 call, again, one of the best ways for direct evidence. And this, it really gave some clarification and credibility to what the daughter was saying. She changed that whole concept of that investigation. And I think Penelope had her first shot at giving a statement to police officers, and they took that statement first before they interviewed the daughter. And that daughter turned that whole investigation upside down.
Yeah. Fascinating.
What she saw. Yeah.
So again, Susie has testified that her mother, Penelope, was the primary aggressor. That is how she described her on the stand and to police. She claims that the argument was going on for several minutes, that it grew so contentious. And she said that the father asked the mother to leave multiple times. So that would have diffused things, leaving.
Right.
Okay, so let's get to this part about when he collapses. First responders arrive at the scene, and Andrew is in cardiac arrest. He's transported to the hospital, but they could not save his life. Just past midnight, he's declared dead. The medical examiner determined that Andrew's death was caused by cardiac dysrhythmia. It's an irregular heartbeat following an altercation. The examiner noted that the death was hastened by Andrew's underlying issues, which there were many of: hypertension, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Andrew had also reportedly suffered a stroke a few months prior to the altercation. The man is not well.
Right.
Not a healthy 66-year-old. So, in addition to the fatal cardiac event, which ended Andrew's life, he had a bruise on his eye, a laceration on the lip, abrasions on his back. That could have, I suppose, happened in the collapse, in the fall, or no one has asserted otherwise.
Right. And the pathologist said that she was unable to determine the age of those bruising, those marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, look, Andrew was not a healthy man, and I do not believe that that was a secret to anyone in the family. So, he had an enlarged heart. He had multiple blockages, issues with arteries. His pancreas was compromised, and he wore a constant glucose monitor for his diabetes. The man was not well. So, what does one do with that? I mean, we're dealing with a man who's clearly not well, and everyone in the family knows it. It was initially classified by police as a domestic violence incident, And it would be 14 months later before Penelope would be charged with manslaughter in Andrew's death.
Yeah. And it looks like a lot of that came from the final diagnosis, cause of death, from the pathologist, when she said he died directly as a result of Penelope's physical attack on her husband, which to me, honestly, is just asinine.
Interesting. I am curious, like you said, why wasn't she charged with other things like the domestic violence in addition to this manslaughter? Was the manslaughter stretch? I mean, I'm like, wow, that's a tough one to prove with a man who is already ill, unless somehow you can prove that she knew that he was at a disadvantage and that he was ill, and maybe deep down inside, she wouldn't have minded if he passed.
Well, even if she didn't mind, that's not a crime. I don't mind if they die. I mean, by itself, but to put it all on her, his heart rate skipping a beat, it just failing him at that moment. It could have been a series of things. And for example, during the 911 call, Anna, you can hear the daughter screaming, "Stop, stop, stop," multiple times at her mother, because she's the one actually striking him during that time, and he's up against a wall. So did the daughter cause stress to the dad at that time? Because the daughter's hearing that the dad is hearing the daughter scream, and there's turmoil in the household, and not in front of my kids, please. I mean, under that logic, you could have charged her if she knew the father wasn't well. It's just a ridiculous charge for the elements that exist, the facts that exist. Should have never happened.
Well, what about the fact that Penelope's defense was self-defense, that he was the one who was being aggressive with her and she was just defending herself?
A great point. And we know now, unless the daughter's lying, and there's some thought in that process also, because daughter had a tumultuous relationship with her mom herself, and they weren't talking. Was he attacking her? And there's no indication of that at all.
Here's something, though. Whether or not the husband struck her back, which to me is, remember, because the daughter went back upstairs. So she was not fully present the entire time of the altercation.
True. Good point.
Right?
Yes.
So just for the issue of fairness, the possibility he may or may not have put hands on her. I do not know the answer to that, because there is a period of time when the daughter was not there. But as part of Penelope's defense, she said that he was ridiculing her as he's trying to kick her not only out of where she's living, but during this altercation, this argument, he's belittling her. And we know that words, along with the physical actions, are all part of the abuse. Then she claims, again, from her side, she went to grab her coat from the couch in the living room, and that she says that Andrew grabbed her and pushed her into the living room wall. So that could have happened when the daughter was not there. The defense claimed that Penelope was in a state of shock, that he continued yelling at her. This is all from the testimony. And he's shoving her out of the house. And that's when she tried to defend herself. And that's when Andrew fell. So that's the only part here is it possible he put hands on her?
It's possible.
Right.
It is absolutely possible. We can't say yay or nay on that. Do you know, Anna, because I looked, I couldn't find, but if they were able to do a full interview with her that evening, or did it stop at the location of the incident?
I do not know the answer to that.
Rights.
Yeah,
because everything you just said would be things would have come up initially. She would have said that. Mm-hmm. Or did she ask for her attorney immediately? And at what point did she find out that her daughter saw and heard a lot of it?
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, when you mentioned the forensic pathologist here, Rebecca Dedrick, that she gave the testimony that Andrew's death was a homicide. Now, they could still have maybe pursued charges even in an accidental death, correct?
Accidental, sure.
But homicide is a tough one.
Yeah, but the accidental death, the element is still the same, Anna. It has to be a reasonable expectation that your actions could result in a horrible injury or a fatality. So some of the elements are still the same, but.
So she was asked more about this declaration that she said that the cardiac event was caused by the altercation. That's why the death was classified as homicide. And here's the other thing she said. This to me is the most fascinating. Andrew would not have died that day had there not been an altercation. That was her finding.
She lost credibility with that statement.
For a man so ill.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not black and white. It's just, how did his day go? Right. And they had 14 months to put a timeline on that and to get all this evidence together to substantiate whether or not that was the only issue, the only thing. And also, I think they got the diagnosis they wanted from the prosecution did from that pathologist. Those staff meetings to decide whether or not we're going to go forward with this prosecution or not, probably a gold mine of information, those that we'll never know because they're not public as to what was the deciding decision to go to investigate further. The daughter also testified that mom showed up, she believes, intoxicated. And she based that belief on a few things. One is prior occasions. This is consistent with what she looks like and behaves like every time she's drunk. And the daughter also testified that it was, and in the opening argument, that mom commonly would travel with her water bottle full of wine. Officer put in his report that he grabbed Penelope's water bottle at the scene, smelled it, and it was consistent with being full of wine. Didn't collect it, never got tested, obviously, and they never did a blood draw on her that night. I mean, there's so many other things here where they came to a conclusion rather quick that this was just an accident, unfortunate event, an act of God, if you will, but never really pursued it as a domestic violence investigation.
Yeah, that is interesting. Especially, I wonder, did anyone at that moment, that night, think that this would end up with manslaughter charges? I don't think so, including the police officers investigating.
I agree with you. I agree. That was something that was formulated after a 14-month investigation.
Yeah. And not not the strongest case. And I will say the decisions made by the defense to go for a bench trial, have the judge decide whether there's enough evidence versus a jury. Everything is a gamble. I don't know how the jury would have voted on this one.
Well, you never know, right?
No, right. You never know.
You just never know. But great point. I think that it was a brilliant decision to take it to the judge because this case is based on the elements of the crime. One of them, huge, is intent. And without intent, you can't go any further. So that's one of the main reasons this case was dropped. The judge put passion aside and everything else and looked at the elements, which look at it as a recipe, parts of things that go into a cook, right? You have to have the entire recipe before you have the final product. So they didn't have it. And a jury, you just never know. You just never know.
Yeah. And even though, from the testimony I saw of the daughter, she seemed credible, the defense did pick apart the daughter and claim that there were several inconsistencies in her story. That's possible. That doesn't mean she's not telling the truth.
Yeah, exactly. Right. She didn't like her mom. Her mom didn't like her, at least at that time.
No, they were not talking. No.
Yeah. And she's living with dad on top of everything else. Right.
And so's the brother. And in the middle of all this, not only did she call 911, the daughter, she also called the older brother because there's three of them. So, and it's just all very interesting. Then the strategy after the prosecution rests for the defense to call no witness, to be done, and they go to closing arguments. I was like, wow, it's risky.
It's risky, but I think that was also a great move, because why? The prosecution, in essence, just laid out your defense case. There's nothing to add. What they said, right? I've seen that done a few times successfully, and usually it's, but these are things that could have been identified on the prosecution while they're thinking about how or if to proceed with this, that they should have been able to identify. So again, the motive for going forward, why did they go forward? Was it to please somebody, or one of those things where they like to say, let's leave it up to a jury? Well, I don't know. Let a jury decide. Let's continue to ruin this person's life who's been wrongfully accused of homicide. And let's see what the jury says.
His family is politically connected. They both come from very influential families.
Yeah.
And
it muddies up the waters, doesn't it?
It does. It is what I do find, again, and I've said I'm fascinated by this case, is because it's really in many ways out of the box. Should the charges have been brought? Should they have gone to trial? I don't know. Like you, I think some additional charges maybe of domestic violence really would have been authentic to the situation and to honor the victim here. Because he's dead. It was a stressful situation. And it sounds, no matter which version you believe entirely, it sounds like this argument involved two people, and yes, and they were not good to each other at this moment. So it was a volatile situation with allegations of each of them hitting each other and saying horrible things to each other. I wish I could believe that the manslaughter charge was a way of honoring the domestic violence charges or the allegations of domestic violence, but it's not. It did not preserve that.
No, they could have charged it also, but I think it's kind of what they would call a lesser included crime. But they took it off the books, and that might have been a mistake, because that is one thing that I think they would have had absolute justice, a reason to go forward with. And maybe they still will, but something tells me they're going to wash their hands and say goodbye to the whole thing that they should never have got involved in the first place.
Well, that was the judge's ruling. Not guilty on the charge of manslaughter. And then once the verdict is read, you see her, Penny, getting up and hugging everyone who's there in the courtroom. And wow, it's like, what a horrible situation. Your father dies. Your mother is charged, implicated in his death. And then, this testimony, now the decision, your father's still gone. It's horrible.
Right. It's really a slippery slope. If she would have been convicted, other cases that follow, that threshold starts to lower and lower and lower of what you need to hit to get a conviction. It's scary. Having a conversation, a heated argument with somebody, right? It could lead to a homicide conviction. In itself, I mean, just not having the intent in your mind. How do you prove intent on these cases? You just can't. But it is a slippery slope, and a lot of people out there are going, I'm sure, right?
Yeah,
the snowball
absolutely.
effect here.
Yeah, fascinating case, and I did have a lot of sympathy for the daughter, because as I'm watching the mother, the mother is glaring at her. There's no question about it. And she's got like this intense stare at her daughter. And I, as a parent, oh my God, if I saw my child in a situation so stressful in a courtroom, trying to process her father's death, and then trying to, and the pressure of this, I think I would be crying for my child on the stand.
Yeah, that's exactly a huge emotion that was missing from mom.
Yeah.
And that doesn't play well. And the jury may have looked into that by itself and thought we could have weighed in on their decision.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating case. We really wanted to talk about it. It's just got a lot going on there in Massachusetts.
Yeah, that they do. That they do. This judge to get two back-to-back high-profile cases like this, and this first one is not even over yet.
No.
She's, she made her decision under the spotlight and knew it would be, and I think it's going to hold.
Yeah, I think so too. It is time for our comments section. These are the crime cases you all are talking about on social media, and our producer Will Updike is here now. Hey, Will, how are you?
Good. How's it going, Anna?
Good.
Hi, Will. Good to see you, sir.
Great to see you. So this week we have a case of a hoof versus foot showdown. This case comes out of Jacksonville, Florida, where the pursuit of a suspect in a drug case ended in dramatic fashion as a horse-mounted police chased the man down, eventually wearing him out and arresting him. So the suspect here, Jordan Wilson, was reportedly part of a suspicious narcotics handoff between him and another unnamed suspect. So don't know too much about this other suspect. We're going to mostly be focusing on Jordan Wilson here. So now, unfortunately for this alleged perpetrator, he was encountered by Officer Cassie Hare, who was riding Nash, love that name for a horse, and began pursuit of the suspect here with the backup of 3 other mounted officers. So keeping track at home, it's kind of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for this alleged suspect here. So the suspect continues to flee on foot through the busy streets and parking lots of Jacksonville. The footage is actually pretty wild. I'm going to show a little bit of that for you.
Hey! Come on, get in there. Get that Batman. Get that Batman in there. Get him. Get him now. Hey, get on the ground. You're going to get run over. Come on, Nash. Come on, Nash. Get him, boy. You better stop. You're going to get hit. Come on, Nash.
It's absolutely nuts. It's shaking all over the place. One thing that I really like is that there's sort of a conversation going on here between Cassie and Nash. She's giving the horse encouragement. She's saying, catch that bad man. She's also talking to the suspect. Obviously here, she's telling him to stop fleeing, urging that he has no chance of really getting out of this scenario. At one point, she's even trying to reason with the suspect. She says, bro, you're not going to be able to outrun us on the horse. You better stop. But the guy keeps trucking it at full speed. He's undeterred in this whole thing. This chase lasts around a quarter mile, which I feel like, for human versus horse to stay ahead for a quarter mile, I feel like that's somewhat of an achievement, probably better than I could do. But, as you might expect, this, the mounted police eventually overcame the suspect and he was apprehended by these mounted officers. They put him in the back of a squad car after, and he's like just drenched in sweat, as you can imagine, in that Jacksonville heat and humidity, and this run. Gotta be honest, not sure why they couldn't put him on the back of a horse. He was apprehended by horse.
Oh, that's hard.
Hop on the back of the horse, buddy.
Wild West here. It's like, what is this, Horizon?
I want to see a suspect on the back of a horse. I don't even know how you do it, if they'd ride behind you or if they'd kind of lay on their tummy on the back.
Kevin Costner could tell us how to do it.
Exactly. Hopefully we get Horizon Part 2 here coming soon. Anyways,
I didn't understand Part 1.
The suspect here, Jordan Wilson, was charged with the count of resisting an officer without violence, which is a key distinction here, and has since been released from custody. This one was really interesting to me because I love any time we can get sort of an animal involved. Louis, I know you actually have some experience with canines in the police force. Do you have any experience with any horses or any other odd animals that have been used in the force?
This is not the first time that I've seen horses capture a suspect. In the right scenario, very similar to what you just described. I saw the video on this case that you're describing here. I've seen videos of deputies on horses lassoing the suspect.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And it's just, they're incredible tools, But every time I watch these videos, if I don't know the ending ahead of time, I always worry about the animal.
Yes.
The harm. A lot of times with canines, dogs, like you just brought up, the suspect will retaliate against that animal. Right, the first contact, and sometimes it turns out really horrible for the animal. They don't care. So it's, even though it's kind of fun how they chased him and tracked him down, that horse was in absolute danger. I don't want to mitigate that at all, and which protected the officers. Your comment about he did pretty well keeping distance. They could have overtaken him any time. I saw that video. She could have finished it any time, but she did it, the deputy, in the safest way possible. And also, I think the safest way possible for her horse.
Yeah.
And, I heard the conversation. It was hysterical, the conversation itself. But, at that point, you don't know who you're dealing with and how violent this could turn into. It's still a very tough situation, but it was, at the end of the day, now we know how it ended and everything. There's some comedy here for sure.
Is there any sort of training that they do when they're training these animals, like to be able to stay safe when they're in pursuit of of a suspect or anything? Or is it just kind of, I don't know, it's just reactionary?
Well, I think for the canines, yes. The training is to be when they release that canine. There's not we'll try less lethal first. It's 100 miles an hour. That animal, that's the best way to protect itself, not to make itself minimize its exposure. For the horses, I think a lot of it. There's some training there also, I think, but really it's up to the deputy how the deputy wants to use that horse as a tool and how they want to implement the tools and the training that they've have under their belt with the animal.
How long, do you know how long an officer would stay with a particular horse? Like how long Cassie might be with Nash, or did they retire them at a certain point?
Oh, I'm guessing here, but like canines for the duration of that relationship between the rider and horse. That was probably her, I don't know, but many of them are their own personal horses.
Oh, wow.
Right. Canines, not so much. And then with the incredible Kobe Webb, who we've had on this program before, a lot of the work she did was with her own canine. She went out and paid for her initial one. She started the program. She took the training to the highest level in the country, if not the world. So there are instances like that, whether it's yours or an animal that's provided to you. But for horses, I really believe it's more of a personal animal that they allow to use in law enforcement capacity.
I always find it
interesting, that police departments still have these mounted police units. We for sure have them here in Los Angeles, and we have them in a huge city like New York. And it's always so jarring, maybe a little less in LA, but in New York, when I will see the mounted police going by and you're just like, it's chaos in Manhattan with traffic and electric bikes and people. And then you add the horses. It's very interesting. Like, I wonder, will there be a continued place for them in, future policing? I can understand it for crowd control, right? I can understand it for a lot of things. But that's such a big animal.
But part of it, Louis, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, part of the advantage, especially in city centers and stuff, has got to be like the visibility that you can get right above a crowd. Because I don't know of another way that you could really replicate that.
Right. I mean, you put towers, right. A mobile visibility.
Mobily, so, yeah. Like right? It still has some sort of agility.
So, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And I think there's always going to be situations where if you have a horse available, you're going to want it. Suspects take off into the woods, right? An area where
yes, of course.
I mean, there's always going to be a need for horses, and maybe through time, advancements and what other technology is available, that might begin to mitigate a little bit. But no, I can see them being around for a long time. In tracking suspects down and being visible. And if you've stood in front of a row of horses during a skirmish, right, it's pretty impressive. They're coming at you. Most normal people would move, but those horses, again, will get rocks, bottles thrown at them, and worse. They're out there on the front lines. But to your point, Anna, they are extremely trained to be in those environments and not let outside influences cause them to go nuts, basically, and get sidetracked on what their duty is, their mission.
Yeah.
They're great tools, great animals, a lot of fun to be around. The public loves them, kids love them, right?
They do.
It helps communicate and bring a positive light onto law enforcement.
Anna, you brought up it being like a little chaotic. I always think it's pretty magical to see the horse in a like metropolitan environment. I love it personally.
Yeah. It is magical, and kids really do get so excited. In LA, it's a little different because we're still considered part of the West, and our studios are in Burbank, and we have a huge equestrian center in Burbank, California. That's where my son used to ride his horse. And so we are very accustomed. Like, I'm not kidding. I will drive to the True Crime News studio and there could be horses on either side of me as I am driving to work in Burbank. It's just how we live. So it is magical. It is special.
You never see him at the beach, which I feel like the horse could be pretty useful on the beach if you had to run somebody down. It's hard to run in sand.
Have I seen horses at the beach?
Would Malibu have and Santa Monica have horses? They must.
I've never seen it. I'm just saying it seems like it would make sense to me.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Interesting question. If there's a rule why they can't work at the beach, I'm gonna go out on the limb and say they can. But anybody out there is watching and knows, leave a message in the comments.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, if you ever seen horses on the beach, it's a good point. It's seldom. I'll say that. So not too common.
I like that you brought up that the horse could have overtaken this suspect likely at any time. It was more of a safety thing for the horse and probably to a certain degree for the suspect as well. We got a lot of comments about the speed of this horse. John L. Was down on Nash. He said Nash is slow as hell. Shan R. wanted to know, was the horse moving slow, the suspect, or both? I thought this was interesting because the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office here actually responded to these slow allegations. They made a little bit of a joke for it. As we're recording this, it's Valentine's Day, and the Sheriff's Office there made a Valentine's Day card with not the most flattering picture of Nash, but it says, "Dear Valentine, call me police service horse Nash because I want to chase you real slow," which I thought was really, really, really cute. Of course, people wanted to know, like, what made this guy think he could possibly outrun a horse? Hingle M said, how many brain cells does it take to realize you can't outrun a horse? Yeah, I'm probably giving up. I've always kind of been a little scared of horses. I really like them, but they're just like so big and powerful that they kind of freak me out. There's no way I'm attempting to flee if I'm ever caught in a crime and there's a mounted officer nearby. I'm giving that one up. And then we got a local comment. This came from Weish W, who said, "This happened in my hometown. This doesn't surprise me at all. The other day, the police had to come with a team to remove an alligator from a busy road. Just another day in Florida." Unfortunately, it wasn't our friend Albert the alligator, who we'll have to follow up on in this little piece at some point. But that is going to do it for today's comment section. I want to thank everybody who sent those in. You can, of course, do that over on our YouTube community page. You can also reach out to us on social media at any time. We're at My True Crime News across all platforms. So yeah, that'll do it. And until next week, don't do crime.
Bye, Will.
Bye, Will.
Oh my goodness. See, we managed to get 2 Valentines in both our stories today.
Yeah. How about that?
How about that? Well, yeah. Louis, as always, it's such a pleasure. And where can people find you if they just want to know what you're up to or if they need help?
Thank you, Anna. You can see my entire social media footprint at getbitinvestigations.com.
Great. I'm at Ana G News, Anna with 1 N, My True Crime News, all social media. We're really blowing up on TikTok these days now that they're not getting rid of the TikTok. You can find this episode wherever you get your episode. I mean, can you imagine this? Actually, well, no, I just passed year 5. 5 years of hosting this podcast. Is that crazy?
It really is to watch what you've done to this program. It's incredibly amazing, simply amazing. We over 400 episodes. Where are you at now?
I don't know. Are we between 400 or 500? I'm not sure. There's so many of them because we like to do anniversaries every once in a while. So yeah, I was looking a few months ago thinking, when's it time for our anniversary issue? Because when we hit a milestone, I love to do like a really special podcast and it can go in any different direction. Not sure what I'm going to do as the special podcast this year. We've done a lot. I
have it at from very credible sources. It's 470 episodes.
470. Wow, that's crazy.
Thank you, David. That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? 470 episodes. You can listen to all of them.
I like that. And was that I like that. Did I miss that? Was that an anniversary? When you do
You're on fire today, Louis.
There you go.
Yeah. So when we hit the 500 mark this year, which we will, we'll do a special podcast. Not sure what it is. I did like last time when we had one of our fans on. I do love that. I love the fans. Yeah. It's kind of cool. Anyway, as I was saying, this podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, you can listen to the 400 other ones. Catch us on YouTube. That's where we have our vibrant community. And I love to hear from all of you. And I can't wait to hear your comments on this case. This is so fascinating. And sign up for our newsletter at truecrimenews.com. So until next week, this is True Crime News, the podcast. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. See you next time, everyone.